So a couple months ago, I decided to pick up Mag after not playing her for months on end, and oh boy is she still triple S tier. She's one of the oldest warframes in the entire game, and yet hardly anyone talks about her. Mag Prime is sitting at just around a 1.6% usage among all players, and even less in Steel Path. But what if I told you that she's secretly one of the best frames that the game has to offer in terms of nuking, damage scaling, and even support? This is a warframe that can one-shot entire rooms for millions of damage, armor strip with a click of a button, chain kill enemies then some faster picks like Mesa, but most players overlook her because they simply don't know how to build her right. In this video, I will show you guys why Mag Prime deserves to be called one of the strongest frames in the entire game, and how you can properly utilize her abilities and scale her into the late game, give you multiple builds that suit your playstyle, and turn her into a magnetic nuke factory. And before I get into the video, a huge shout out to Winnie for making the Mag Bible on Overframe.
Yes.
I've played this game for 8 years and I learned things that I never even knew about Mag. Even some Subsume choices that I never even considered. If you guys like the video and like the builds that I will show in the video, go show Winnie some love because this guide would not have been possible without their help. Before we get into the builds, let's talk about abilities that Mag has and what some of these abilities' core mechanics are, because there's a lot of things that the game doesn't tell you about how Mag functions. Mag's passive is completely useless. Some people will argue and say that Fetch and Vacuum can be removed from companion builds to give them an extra slot to mod.
No.
This is entirely false. The pull range on Mag's passive is, I think, anywhere around 5 to 10 meters, which is quite low, whereas Vacuum and Fetch, which are the looting mods that companions have a far greater range, making her passive mostly useless. Mag's first ability pulls all enemies from the target direction that you are looking at, meaning anything on your screen when you use this ability will get pulled towards you. When these enemies are pulled towards you, they will get grouped into a small vortex right in front of you. This ability is great to pull enemies in to her magnetize. It's also a great ability to get out of a pinch when there's too many enemies around, because all these enemies will get knocked down when they get pulled and stunned for a short duration of time. The augment for this ability is Greedy Pull. Other than very niche use cases, this augment mod is completely useless. Don't use it in any day-to-day builds. Magnetize is Mag's second ability. Magnetize creates a magnetic field around an enemy by tapping the ability key when aiming at them over an unrestricted range. Now, the reason I said tapping the ability key is because there is a hold function of it, but the hold function might as well not exist because of how useless it is. The cast time for this ability is again 1 second, so just having one Tau Forged casting speed shard goes a long way. Now, how does this ability work? An enemy affected by Magnetize is anchored into the middle of the bubble and cannot move, and slowly drags in, but not limited to, enemies and enemy fire. All projectiles and all bullets that pass through the bubble will get trapped into the middle of the bubble, while increasing the amount of damage that these bullets will do by 2 times at base. However, it is important to note that only the main target is affected by the damage multiplier, which isn't great for nuking. However, it's great for things like killing acolytes quickly. Magnetized targets can still attack and cast abilities, which is not an issue for regular mobs, but when you have things like acolytes trapped in your bubble, you don't want to go near them because they will probably end up killing you. Overguarded enemies are immune to the pull effect that Magnetize has, which means they will not be anchored into the middle. But if a magnetic field is cast on an overguard enemy, the magnetic field will move with them until the overguard is broken, and then the ability will function as it would on an unoverguarded enemy. Another important thing to note is that the damage absorbed is not affected by either critical hits, damage type bonuses, or is affected by on-hit effects, which means that if you want to do a lot of damage with these bubbles, you will have to have high base damage weapons rather than having high crit and high status weapons. When the magnetized bubble's duration comes near an end, the bubble explodes, releasing all of the damage that it has absorbed. Now, how does it absorb damage? Each time an enemy gets hit by the damage tick inside of a bubble, 100% of the damage gets added to the explosion damage, meaning the small ticks that you see right now on the screen, these will additively get added to the end of the explosion. If you shoot a weapon into the bubble that does 1000 damage, it will absorb 25% of that damage and add it to each tick of the damage dealt within the bubble. Meaning if you have very hard hitting weapons like the Tigris Prime or the AK Bronco Prime, the bubble can start doing 4, sometimes even 5 figures with no priming. Now this is one way that the explosion damage of the bubble ramps up. The other way is us just shooting our weapon bullets into it. As I stated before, critical hits, status damage, and on-hit effects do not apply to the damage that your guns will do to the bubble. The only thing the bubble takes into consideration is 20% of your base damage. So having weapons that have a high crit chance or status damage or having on-hit effects will not help the damage that your weapon does. The only thing that the bubble takes into consideration is base damage, and 20% of your base damage will be applied to the total damage that your bubble will do, as well as the DLTs. One important thing to note about the bubble is that the damage diminishes over range. So enemies that are closer to the bubble will take more damage, and enemies that are further away will take less damage. And also, the explosion of the bubble does not go through terrain, so it is imperative that you cast Magnetize on enemies that are in an open area. If there are multiple doorways, then you want to cast Magnetize, preferably in the middle of the terrain where it has maximum range to hit as many enemies as it can. Another thing to note is that the bubble does not inherit punch through, so you can't punch through your way out of this problem. Your placement of bubbles has to be good. There are 2 really bad bugs that lets Magnetize down as an ability that you have to kind of work around. The first bug being that if the body of the target for Magnetize disappears, then the bubble will start pulling enemies in nearby. Now, how do bodies disappear in Warframe? With statuses. If you burn the body, or if you kill it with something like corrosive, the body of the target will disappear. So it's important that if you are casting Magnetize, that you cast it on a target that you kill without a status effect that makes their body disappear. The second bug is if there are less than 2 enemies inside a Magnetized bubble, the projectiles of your weapons will not be able to register multi-shots. This means you will need at least a group of 2 or more enemies in your bubble to deal the full damage of your projectile weapon. Mag's third ability is called Polarize. Polarize emits a large spherical pulse of magnetic energy with an initial radius of 12 meters, continuing to spread at 5.9 meters each second for 5 seconds at base, hitting a total of 37 meters at base, which is a lot. When the pulse comes into contact with an enemy, it will leech off their shield and armor, permanently removing a portion of said shield and armor. When this ability is cast, Mag restores her own shield as well as ally shields, which not only helps other teammates but also companions and specters. Any enemies that are hit by Polarize produce a Polarized shard with a 50% chance to produce 2, which does puncture and slash damage at base. These shards can either be picked up by Mag or pulled in by the Magnetized bubble. Now the shards produced are pretty weak, but these shards count as weapons, which means you can boost their damage with Nourish, Citrine's Prismatic Gem, Arcane Arachne, Vigorous Swap, and some others that I forgot to mention. They can also trigger Breach Surge to further increase the overall damage that these shards can do. However, it is worth mentioning that if these shards aren't in the bubble, they are kind of useless. These shards have a 30-second lifespan, which means you can have a lot of shards active at once, and having shards in the Magnetized bubble with something like Breach Surge will make it so you don't even have to shoot the bubble. Breach Surge will kind of just do its own thing with the shards, which is great. The augment for Polarize is an insanely powerful augment for survivability. It literally turns every enemy that it touches into a vegetable. Most enemies hit by this ability just stop whatever they're doing and just start scratching their butt. However, this does make them a little too vegetable. It can really take a toll on your nuking potential. Crush is Mag's 4th ability. This ability is great for crowd control and to produce a lot of shields in a short span of time. Mag gets locked in place for a short duration while suspending and dealing damage to all enemies caught inside of this ability's radius. This ability replenishes shields to all allies in range per enemy hit and can grant overshield. Now, due to the way this ability replenishes shield, it's not a great ability to rely on when it comes to shield gating. I would argue Polarize is much better. However, if there is a large group of enemies in a room and you cast this ability, then you will effectively get maximum shields. But if there are not a lot of enemies, then this ability can be a massive letdown. The augment for this ability is called Fracturing Crush. Fracturing Crush makes it so that any enemy hit with this ability gets armor stripped by 75% at base, which means to get this ability to armor strip at 100%, you only need around 134% strength to get that full 100% armor strip. Now this ability can be very effective because in high level missions there are a lot of armored enemies, and armor is something that can help enemies tank a lot of damage, and if you remove armor, the DPS of any weapon you have increases by unholy amounts. Now that we've talked about the abilities, let's talk about the two main ways that every mag player plays mag. The first way of playing mag is called bubble buffer. Bubble buffer essentially means that you will be unloading a lot of damage into your bubble for your bubble to do high DOT ticks. Now, the DOT ticks at first for mag will seem very minuscule. 54 damage in Seal Path is completely useless. However, you can actually get these damage ticks up to 1,000,000. All you do is you get a high base damage weapon, you shoot it into the bubble, you use abilities like Breach Surge to do even more damage in the bubble, and the bubble will take all of this damage into consideration and start doing hundreds of thousands of damage per tick to any enemy that walks into it. The second and the more popular way to play mag is aimbot weapons. Aimbot weapons essentially are like the Archoplasma or the Exegesis, weapons that you will fire into the bubble that have infinite punch through and last a very long duration, also being able to hit multiple enemies, will essentially nuke everything that gets pulled into the bubble. Now this used to be the way I played mag, but this way of playing mag is not the best way, believe it or not. This is actually one of the worst ways to play mag in my opinion, because bubble buffer mag just sits in a league of her own. Now that we've got the two main ways to play mag out the way, let's look at some of the best weapons that she has in her arsenal. For bubble buffers, the best weapons she can use is the Kuva Heck, the Tigris Prime, the AK Bronco Prime, and any other weapons that have high base damage. Now the reason I mentioned these three is because Winnie mentioned them in her guide, and after using these said weapons, I can honestly agree that there is probably nothing better in the game than these three weapons. However, I don't use these three weapons to bubble buff all the time. I use a weapon called the Didnt Plinks. So honestly, anything that works for you, use it, because as long as you're buffing the damage over time of mag's magnetized bubble, it honestly doesn't matter what you use. For the first build, we won't use any Subsume abilities because I wanted to stand by what I said. Mag is such a powerful frame that she doesn't even need any Subsume abilities. Her whole kit works beautifully together, and as long as you utilize her properly, you'll have a lot of fun. Growing Power and Prime Sure-Footed are our Aura and Excellence mod slots. Arcane Energize and Molt Augmented are our Arcanes. The reason I have Growing Power and Molt Augmented is because we have negative strength, and getting our strength up to at least 130% is important. We use Primed Flow and Equilibrium for our energy economy, Primed Continuity for our duration, Transient Fortitude to mitigate the harsh strength loss we get from overextended. Magnetized Discharge, Fracturing Crush, and Counterpulse are all three augments we will use on this build. Since Counterpulse augment stops enemies in their tracks and makes them into vegetables, we kind of need pull. Fracturing Crush removes any armor of enemies that have too much armor, and Magnetized Discharge is a must on every single mag build because it gives us the ability to auto detonate magnetized bubbles as well as have additional range. Now with this build alone, you're pretty much set to do level cap with mag. If you want some more comfort, you can remove Counterpulse and add Rolling Guard for another 3 seconds of invulnerability. But honestly, if you use mag properly, you won't have any issues surviving. So how do you play mag with this build? You cast Magnetize on an enemy. If you're using a bubble buffer build, you will shoot the bubble a couple times with the Tigris Prime or the AK Bronco Prime. Cast Polarize whenever your shields get low. If there is an enemy in the bubble that doesn't want to die, cast Fracturizing Crush on them, which will completely armor strip them, making the DOT of the bubble do much more damage than it did before. Once the bubble is ready and primed, you just use pull to pull in as many enemies as you can to just delete their health in the bubble. And trust me, it's a very fun build, even without a Subsume. However, this is not the build that I run on a day-to-day basis. I like to do big damage, and for big damage, we use a Subsume ability called Breach Surge. Breach Surge plays the same way, however there are a couple different things that we take into consideration. First, we find an enemy. We make sure that that enemy covers a lot of pathway that enemies will walk into. On that enemy, we will cast Magnetize, which pulls all enemies inside the bubble. When all of your enemies are pulled inside the bubble, you cast a Breach Surge. And when Breach Surge is active, use a weapon of your choice to shoot the bubble. in my case, I always use the Tenet Plinks, which both kill the target and activate Breach Surge to kill everything that didn't die. All of this damage, including Breach Surge, will be absorbed, and as you can see, the damage is already massive. After this, shoot a couple Tigris shots into the bubble, and either wait for the enemies to come into the bubble and die, or detonate it if you want to move to a new area. What are your worst opponents? These enemies, so if you see one, kill it immediately. The good thing about Breach Surge that I like on Mag is you can use the Rakta Dagger to regenerate your shields when you melee attack an enemy that has a radiation proc on them. Breach Surge procs radiation on enemies, meaning if you melee attack in your bubble once or twice, you will have maximum shields. This paired with our 4th ability for overshields makes Mag almost unkillable, while at the same time do hundreds of thousands if not millions of damage. Another Subsume ability that works great for bubble buffers is Tempest Barrage. A Tempest Barrage will cast Magnetize on an enemy and let the bubble pull in all enemies. While the bubble is pulling in enemies, we will shoot the bubble with our Tigris to kill the main target that Magnetize is cast on. We don't want this target to die with Tempest Barrage, because if it does, the body will melt because of the corrosive proc, and the target's body will disappear, which will make the first magnetized bug L+ ratio U. The bubble will continue to pull enemies, in which you will cast Tempest Barrage, which will both armor strip as well as mass apply viral, increasing the bubble DOTs. You can also throw Tempest Barrage around the map before the bubble explodes, just to prime enemies, because when the bubble explosion does happen, it will help you do a couple more millions. Those are my 2 favorite bubble buffer builds, but there is another way to play Mag, which I mentioned before, is the aimbot weapons. With aimbot weapons, you want to make sure that the target's body does not disappear when Magnetize is cast on them. Well of Life negates status effects from Mag, including knockdowns, which already makes his ability great, but the factor that really makes his ability shine is that, like Garuda's Subsume Blood Altar, it makes enemies' bodies not disappear, and enemies that are invulnerable can hold Magnetize until the Magnetize duration ends. The only problem with infinite punch through weapons is that if they hit any sort of terrain, they will disappear, so it's imperative that you keep the enemy away from terrain as much as you can, and Well of Life does that for us. If you're someone like me and are lazy and don't really want to put too much effort in when playing Warframe, Colmay's Subsume ability, I forgot what it's called, is a great way to play alive on Mag. Colmay's ability is an ability that a lot of people are liking due to its 50% chance to completely avoid damage, which for Mag, who can replenish shields at a click of a button, is very strong. And I'll be honest, I don't really like this. It's a very niche ability, and Breach Surge just does it better. Even though you get a 50% chance to evade all incoming damage, Breach Surge can blind every enemy, including Eximus units, making them not very likely to hit or attack you. This alone, with the high range build with Magnetize pulling in all projectiles and us never getting hit, and if we do get hit we just replenish our shields with one ability, makes Breach Surge an ability that helps you survive as much as you need, especially with the Rakta Dagger, because if you do get low on shields, you can just melee an enemy in the middle twice and you'll get your full shields back. For the best companions, honestly, there's only one option. I made a Warframe companion guide a couple weeks ago, and I said it there and I'll say it again, the Panzer Warprofiler is the best companion in the entire game. Not only can the Panzer Warprofiler mass apply viral on most enemies in your vicinity, but it can also armor strip every enemy there. Magnetize is a very good grouping ability. When you cast it on an enemy, it will pull all other enemies into the middle. If the Panzer Warprofiler was to attack one enemy, then they will lose 15% armor with a Vicious Bond. Now the effect of Vicious Bond spreads when that enemy takes ability damage, and since Magnetize does DOT procs, the enemies inside that bubble are constantly taking ability damage, which helps the effect of Vicious Bond spread to all other enemies in the bubble. Now this alone makes the Panzer Warprofiler the best companion that Mag can have, because you're effectively armor stripping enemies and mass applying viral stacks on them, which is basically like a mini Tempest Barrage, even though you don't have Tempest Barrage. Not only that, but with Reinforced Bond, you can also have extra fire rate, which for Mag is great, because the quicker you can shoot the bubbles, the more damage you can stack up in a short amount of time. Now let's get to the last point of this Mag guide, which is Archon shards. With Archon shards, I would highly recommend you have at least 2 Amber Archon shards for casting speed. If you'd have a Tau Forged casting speed shard, you can get away with just 1 Tau Forged casting speed shard. That's what I use. If you don't have any casting speed shards, it's okay. your abilities will feel quite slow to cast, but hopefully if you do get some Archon shards, throw them into the mix. Other than that, honestly, any other Archon shard is a choice entirely up to you. You can use Crimson Archon shards for ability duration, you can use Azure Archon shards for health regeneration, you can use Violet Archon shards for small equilibrium, which is again something I use, and you can also use Azure Archon shards for more shield. Now, notice that I don't have any shield mods on my mag, but I have 1000 shield. Having a higher base shield pool means that you have more time of invulnerability when your shield breaks, and since mag can regen her shields pretty quickly to maximum, having a longer invulnerability window is always really helpful.